In March 2017, Gander Mountain operated 162 stores across 27 states. It was the largest chain of outdoor specialty stores in the United States, larger than any competitor except Bass Pro Shops and Cabela's, which were at that exact moment in the middle of a $5.5 billion merger. Gander Mountain stocked firearms, hunting gear, fishing tackle, camping equipment, marine accessories, and outdoor apparel across locations, averaging 65,000 square feet. It called itself America's Firearms Supercenter. It had more than 5,000 employees. It had $525 million in revolving credit lines. On March 10, 2017, it filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy. By May 5, 2017, all 162 stores were announced for closure. On May 1, 2017, 7 weeks after the bankruptcy filing, Camping World Holdings purchased the Gander Mountain assets at auction for approximately $35.4 million. The same brand that had operated 162 locations and called itself the nation's leader in outdoor specialty retail had just been sold for less than the cost of opening 2 of its own stores. This is the full story of Gander Mountain. From a Wisconsin outdoorsman who couldn't find good hunting gear without driving 100 miles in 1960, to the mail-order catalog that built the national reputation, to the Gun Control Act of 1968 that forced the first pivot, to the bankruptcy of 1984 that nearly ended it, to the aggressive expansion that grew 162 stores in 27 states, to the debt load and the e-commerce wave and the 5 competing sporting goods chains that closed them all in less time than it takes to plan a deer season. Robert Sturgis was an avid outdoorsman who lived in Wilmot, Wisconsin. Wilmot in 1960 was exactly what it sounds like, a small, isolated community in the southernmost corner of Wisconsin, close to the Illinois border, surrounded by farmland and close to some reasonable hunting country. The problem with living in Wilmot in 1960 was that if you needed quality hunting equipment, you drove 100 miles. The hardware stores stocked the basics, but the specific, specialized gear that a serious hunter or shooter needed, unusual cartridges for high-powered hunting rifles, quality archery equipment, specialty decoys, precision hand-loading supplies, required either a long drive to a city sporting goods shop or a mail-order relationship with one of the few catalog suppliers in the country. Sturgis looked at this gap and did what outdoorsmen with entrepreneurial instincts have always done. He decided to fill it himself. In 1960, he opened a small operation in the center of Wilmot, focused on marketing shooting supplies to gun owners and dealers by mail order. The response was immediate. Within a few years, he had refined the catalog model, mailing directly to consumers, expanding the selection, and building a reputation across the Midwest for carrying the hard-to-find items that hunters and shooters couldn't find anywhere else. By 1965, sportsmen from as far away as Montana and upstate New York were ordering from Gander Mountain. He marketed shotguns, an impressive array of unusual cartridges for high-powered hunting rifles, sophisticated archery equipment, and specialty items that no general sporting goods retailer stocked. The name came from the highest point in nearby Lake County, Illinois, Gander Mountain, a glacial hill just across the Wisconsin border. Sturgis had hunted around it. It felt right for a sporting goods company that was, at its core, about getting people outside and into the field. In 1968, the Gun Control Act changed everything. The legislation, passed in response to the assassinations of John F. Kennedy, Robert Kennedy, and Martin Luther King Jr., and the public perception that mail-order firearms sales made guns too accessible to dangerous individuals, prohibited the interstate sale of firearms through catalog or mail-order channels. For a company that had built its reputation and its customer base around exactly that kind of transaction, it was a structural amputation. The catalog that had reached sportsmen from Montana to New York on the basis of its firearms and shooting supply selection could no longer sell the products that had made it valuable. Sturgis did what he could. By 1968, he had already opened a retail store in Wilmot to serve local customers. The store could still sell firearms face-to-face with the paper trail and background check processes the law required. The catalog pivoted to the non-firearms outdoor products that remained legally shippable: fishing tackle, camping equipment, archery gear, outdoor clothing. But the business model that had driven the company's growth in its first 8 years was gone, and what replaced it never quite worked the same way. The customers who had been ordering guns and shooting supplies from Gander Mountain were not necessarily the same customers who ordered fishing tackle or camping equipment, and the catalog's reputation had been built on a product category it could no longer sell. The 1970s were a lost decade for Gander Mountain. Management experimented with different product mixes: more fishing, more camping, more clothing, but could not find the formula that recaptured the momentum of the early catalog years. Small variations in fishing equipment did not move the volume. Expanding the Wilmot store helped locally but did not address the national customer base that had been built on firearms and shooting supplies. The company accumulated debt through the 1970s at a pace that the catalog revenue, now stripped of its most profitable and distinctive category, could not service. By the early 1980s, the numbers had become unmanageable, and the path forward had become clear to everyone except the people who did not want to see it. In 1984, Gander Mountain filed for bankruptcy for the first time. An entrepreneur named Ralph Freitag, who had experience in the outdoor retail market, acquired the company out of the 1984 bankruptcy proceedings and began a patient, methodical reconstruction that took nearly a decade to fully bear fruit. Freitag and his team understood something that the original business had struggled to articulate after 1968. The future of the outdoor retail business was not the catalog. It was the destination store. And the destination store model required scale, atmosphere, and selection that went far beyond anything the Wilmot location had been able to provide. The concept Freitag pursued was not revolutionary in the abstract, but it was genuinely new in the context of 1987 Wisconsin. A large format retail store, significantly larger than any conventional sporting goods store, but smaller than a warehouse club, stocked with every outdoor product category under one roof, and designed to feel like an extension of the outdoors rather than a conventional retail box. Wide aisles wide enough for a family to walk side by side. High ceilings with exposed joists that created the vertical space of a large barn. Log-wrapped support columns, brick and stone accents, taxidermied wildlife mounted throughout the building, a firearms department staffed by people who actually used the products and could have an informed conversation about them, a fishing department arranged by technique and species rather than by brand, in the way that an experienced angler would organize a tackle box. In 1987, Gander Mountain opened its first off-site retail store in Brookfield, Wisconsin, then Appleton, then Eau Claire, then Madison. The stores performed in a way the catalog years had not. Customers drove significant distances to reach them because a Gander Mountain destination store offered something that no local sporting goods store in any of those communities could match in selection, scale, or atmosphere. The man who had been driving 100 miles to find good hunting gear now had a reason to drive to Brookfield. That was enough. By 1992, Gander Mountain was mailing 35 million specialized catalogs annually to customers in the United States, Canada, and Western Europe. The average catalog customer order was $80. The retail stores were growing. In 1994, the company reported sales of $246 million from 17 locations. The recovery appeared complete. In 1996, it filed for bankruptcy again. The second bankruptcy was a pivotal moment in the company's history, and not simply because of the financial distress. The restructuring that followed it forced a clarification of what Gander Mountain actually was. The catalog business was stripped out and sold, eventually making its way to Cabela's, which used it in a deal that included a non-compete clause that would haunt Gander Mountain for the next decade. The retail store operation was sold to Holiday Companies, a privately owned Minnesota operator of gas stations and convenience stores. Holiday bought all 17 stores and continued operating them under the Gander Mountain name. The non-compete clause was the wound that would not close. As part of the deal that sold the direct marketing and catalog division, Gander Mountain agreed not to operate a website or publish a catalog until 2008. In 2017 terms, in any terms after 1999, Really, that restriction was extraordinary. The late 1990s and early 2000s were the years when Cabela's, Bass Pro Shops, and REI built the digital customer relationships that would sustain them through the next 2 decades. They collected email addresses, built loyalty programs, refined their recommendation engines, learned what their customers bought and when they bought it, and created the data infrastructure that allowed them to market precisely and cost-effectively to an audience they understood in granular detail. While this was happening, Gander Mountain, contractually prohibited from participating, watched from the analog sidelines. By the time the non-compete expired in 2008 and Gander Mountain launched its online store, the gap between it and its digital competitors was 10 years wide, and in practical terms, probably not closable. A decade of customer relationship data, a decade of e-commerce operational learning, a decade of loyalty program development. All of that was not available to Gander Mountain when it finally joined the digital marketplace in the year that the iPhone had already been on the market for 12 months, and Amazon had already defined what online shopping could be. In 2010, Pratt & Erickson took the company private again, buying out minority shareholders for approximately $25 to $30 million. The public markets had delivered it 5 consecutive years of financial losses, and the quarterly reporting cycle was not compatible with the long-term investment required to build the physical and digital retail infrastructure needed to compete with Bass Pro and Cabela's. Going private was intended to give management the freedom to expand without the pressure of earnings guidance. The strategy was clear: more stores in more markets, faster, with the conviction that scale would generate the traffic and the purchasing leverage needed to compete. Between 2012 and 2017, Gander Mountain opened or announced approximately 60 new stores. The existing 100-store network grew to 162 locations in 27 states in 5 years. The expansion reached Texas, where 10 new stores opened into markets where Bass Pro Shops and Academy Sports were already well established. Alabama, South Carolina, markets where the Gander Mountain name had no existing customer relationships and where the competitive environment was far more crowded than the Midwest of 1987, when the destination store concept had first succeeded. Gander Mountain had been the 5th outdoor retailer to file for bankruptcy in the previous 12 months when it filed in March 2017. Sports Authority, once the largest sporting goods chain in the United States, had liquidated in 2016. Dick's Sporting Goods acquired its intellectual property and many of its store leases. Sports Chalet had closed all 47 of its California locations. Eastern Mountain Sports had filed. The outdoor and sporting goods retail sector was experiencing, in concentrated form, the structural disruption that online commerce had been applying to physical retail across every category for years. Too many stores selling too much of the same merchandise at prices that couldn't compete with Amazon. In leased spaces that carried fixed costs that required traffic levels the market was no longer reliably providing. Gander Mountain's bankruptcy petition named the cause directly, challenging traffic patterns and shifts in consumer demand resulting from increased direct-to-customer sales by key vendors and accelerated growth of e-commerce. The admission was honest. It was also, by the time it was made, roughly a decade too late to be acted upon. Under Holiday's ownership, the retail chain expanded through the 2000s with genuine momentum, from 17 stores at the time of the 1996 bankruptcy to 38 by 2000 to 118 by 2009. The stores went public in 2004, which gave the company capital for further expansion and offered employees equity in an operation that, for the first time in its history, appeared to have found its correct form. The format evolved, stores grew larger, averaging 50,000 to 120,000 square feet, with some flagship locations reaching the full 120,000, nearly 3 acres of retail floor under one roof. Each store was designed to feel like a destination rather than a transaction. The visual language was consistent: wide aisles, high exposed joist ceilings, log-wrapped support columns, stone accents mounted wildlife throughout the building, and a firearms department positioned prominently near the entrance where knowledgeable staff could discuss products with customers whose questions required more than a scan of a product description. The experience of walking into a Gander Mountain store in 2005 was genuinely different from walking into a Dick's Sporting Goods or a Target. It felt specific, designed for a specific kind of person with a specific set of interests by people who shared those interests. The staff who worked the firearms counter knew guns. The staff in the fishing department could talk tackle. The store didn't pretend to be for everyone, which was the point. The customers who found it felt found. The firearms department became increasingly central to the Gander Mountain identity through the 2000 DES. The company positioned itself aggressively as America's Firearms Supercenter, claiming leadership in new and used firearm sales and building a reputation in the shooting sports community as a knowledgeable, well-stocked destination for the serious gun buyer. This strategy made compelling sense in the market context of the mid-2000s. The post-September 11 environment had deepened American interest in personal protection and home defense. The gun culture of the rural Midwest, which had been Gander Mountain's founding customer base, was expanding into suburbs and secondary cities as demographic shifts moved working-class populations out of cities and into the ring communities around them. The 2008 election of Barack Obama produced one of the most significant firearms buying surges in American history. Gun owners who believed the new administration would pursue restrictive firearms legislation bought in advance of anticipated restrictions, creating demand spikes that emptied shelves across the country. Gander Mountain's gun-heavy inventory and its positioning as America's Firearms Supercenter meant it captured an outsized share of that surge. The 2012 election produced a second surge. The company's firearms-driven traffic was extraordinary in those years. The strategy that had seemed like an aggressive bet on a single product category looked, from inside the 2012 fiscal year, like brilliant positioning. Firearms accounted for approximately 43% of Gander Mountain's total sales in the years leading up to the 2017 bankruptcy. That concentration, nearly half of all revenue in a single product category whose demand was driven significantly by political anxiety, was both the company's greatest strength in good years and, as market conditions normalize, its greatest vulnerability. In 2010, majority owners David Pratt and the Erickson family, the holiday company's principals, took the company private again, buying out minority shareholders for approximately $25 to $30 million after 5 consecutive years of financial losses. Going private was intended to give the company the freedom to restructure it without the quarterly pressure of public markets. The strategy was to expand aggressively, with the conviction that more stores and more markets would drive the scale needed to compete with Bass Pro and Cabela's. Between 2012 and 2017, Gander Mountain opened or announced approximately 60 new stores, roughly double the rate it had been growing in the previous decade. The expansion reached Texas, where 10 new stores opened, Alabama, where 4 stores opened, markets across the South and West where the Gander Mountain name had no existing recognition and no established customer relationships. The stores required leases, inventory, staff, and the capital expenditure of fitting out a 65,000 square foot space to look like a wilderness hunting lodge. Each new store represented a bet that the Gander Mountain destination retail model would translate to a market where the brand was unknown. Some of the bets were wrong. In markets where Bass Pro Shops or Cabela's already operated, and by 2015 both had aggressively expanded nationally into markets that Gander Mountain had once considered its territory, Gander Mountain was the third best option. In those markets, the customer who wanted a destination outdoor store went to Bass Pro or Cabela's because the experience was better. The selection was comparable, and the brand recognition was stronger. Bass Pro Shops in particular had refined the destination store concept to an almost theatrical level. Flagship location featured aquariums, live fish tanks, indoor waterfalls, and restaurant concepts that turned the shopping trip into a half-day experience. Gander Mountain's log-wrapped columns and mounted elk were a version of the same idea, but they could not match the scale or the immersiveness of what Bass Pro had built. In markets where Academy Sports and Outdoors competed, a Texas-based discount sporting goods chain that had been expanding aggressively into the Midwest and Southeast, Gander Mountain was the more expensive alternative without a compelling experiential advantage over Academy's no-frills efficiency. And Dick's Sporting Goods, which had aggressively expanded its own outdoor and hunting departments, after acquiring Sports Authority locations in 2016, was now present in many of the same markets Gander Mountain served, with the backing of a publicly traded company generating $7 billion in annual revenue. In markets where none of these competitors operated, the truly unchallenged geography, the Gander Mountain model worked. But those markets were becoming scarce because Bass Pro Shops, Cabela's, and Academy Sports had been filling them for years with the same strategic logic Gander Mountain had used. And then came Amazon. The e-commerce pressure on outdoor retail was not new by 2017. It had been building since the mid-2000s. Amazon's entry into sporting goods, outdoor equipment, and ammunition, categories that had previously required specialty retail relationships, democratized access to exactly the products that had given stores like Gander Mountain their reason to exist. A customer in rural Wisconsin who had once driven to Gander Mountain because no local store stocked the ammunition he needed for his deer rifle could now order it from Amazon and have it delivered to his door in 2 days. The expertise that Gander Mountain staff provided, the ability to help a hunter choose between similar firearms, to recommend the right lure for a specific lake, to help a first-time camper assemble a functional gear list, was valuable when the alternative was guessing alone. It was less valuable when the customer could read 200 reviews on Amazon, watch YouTube videos of the product in use, and consult forums of experienced outdoorsmen before buying anything. Gander Mountain's own online store, launched in 2008, a decade after Cabela's and Bass Pro had established dominant digital presences, never developed the customer base or the conversion rates that could offset the structural cost of operating 162 large format physical stores. The fixed costs of those stores, rent, utilities, inventory, payroll for 5,000 employees, required a level of traffic that the market was no longer reliably providing. The gun sales that had sustained the business through 2008 and 2012 normalized after 2016. The political anxiety that had driven the surge purchases dissipated. The inventory that Gander Mountain had stocked in anticipation of continued elevated demand sat on shelves longer than the debt structure could comfortably support. The company reported assets and debts each in the range of $500 million to $1 billion in its March 2017 bankruptcy petition. It had $30 million in term loans and $525 million in revolving credit lines. Gander Mountain had been the fifth outdoor retailer to file for bankruptcy in the previous 12 months. Sports Authority, once the largest sporting goods chain in the United States, had liquidated in 2016. Sports Chalet had closed. Eastern Mountain Sports had filed. Eastern Outfitters had filed. The outdoor retail sector was experiencing, in concentrated form, the structural disruption that online commerce had been applying to physical retail across every category for years. The bankruptcy auction in late April 2017 attracted limited interest. Sportsman's Warehouse considered it bidding on up to 80% of the locations. Camping World Holdings, run by Marcos Lemonis, ultimately won the auction on May 1st, 2017, paying approximately $35.4 million for the intellectual property, brand name, e-commerce operations, real estate leases, and selected store fixtures and equipment. The inventory was liquidated separately. On May 5th, 2017, Gander Mountain announced the closure of all remaining locations. Camping World reopened 69 of the locations in early 2018 under a new name, Gander Outdoors. The new stores combine Gander Mountain's outdoor merchandise with Camping World's RV products and accessories. From 2019 to 2020, Gander Outdoors sponsored NASCAR's Truck Series as the replacement for Camping World in that role. The brand was subsequently renamed Gander R5 and Outdoors, then Gander R5, reflecting the increasing dominance of the RV business relative to the outdoor retail operation. The Gander Mountain name, the one Robert Sturgis had chosen because he liked hunting near a glacial hill across the Wisconsin state line, exists today as a website and as brand equity in a corporate structure that primarily sells RVs. Of the 162 stores that operated in March 2017, most of the locations have been converted to other retail uses or remain vacant, The outdoor retail market they served is now served by Bass Pro Shops, Cabela's, Academy Sports, Dick's Sporting Goods, REI, and Amazon. Robert Sturgis opened a mail-order business in Wilmot, Wisconsin in 1960 because he couldn't find good hunting gear without driving 100 miles. 57 years later, the company he built filed for bankruptcy because customers could find everything they needed without driving anywhere at all. The 100-mile problem had been replaced by the 0-mile problem, and 162 stores couldn't solve it.